But anyway, those were the games from last week. So that sets up our conference championship games coming up this weekend. On Friday night, which this game really doesn't mean anything in the playoff rankings, but the Pac-12 championship, Oregon will play Utah. Remember, Utah hammered Oregon just a few weeks ago, so that's the Pac-12 championship. Then on Saturday, we get into the meat of it. Baylor will play Oklahoma State at noon for the Big 12 championship. Utah State and San Diego State for the Mountain West. Appalachian State and Louisiana Lafayette for the Sun Belt. Then Georgia plays Alabama, the marquee game of the weekend, number 1 against number 3 for the SEC championship. Interesting game, Houston and Cincinnati. You know, I took a look at those two teams. Houston's only lost one game. Houston's, if you match their offense and their defense with Cincinnati's, it's a pretty close match. I think that could be a better game than most people will give credit for going into it. So that's going to be the AAC championship. Wake Forest will play Pittsburgh for the ACC championship. And then Saturday night at 8 o'clock, another big one, Iowa and Michigan from Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship. So let's go back to our standings, and I'm going to give you my scenario, and you can tell me what you think after you hear it. Again, let me recap. Georgia's 1, Michigan's 2, Alabama's 3, Cincinnati's 4, Oklahoma State's 5, Notre Dame's 6, Ohio State's 7. Now, Georgia's in. I think Georgia is in regardless of what happens, okay? Yeah. If they win, they're the number 1 team in the country, seeded number 1. If they lose, I think they drop no worse than 4, maybe even 3, depending upon what else happens. Michigan wins, they're in. Alabama wins, they're in. Alabama loses, they're out. Cincinnati wins, they're in. Cincinnati loses, they're out. Now here's where it gets interesting. If Georgia... Well, obviously, Georgia and Alabama can't both win. So let's say Georgia wins. Georgia's in. Michigan wins if they're in. Cincinnati's wins if they're in. Alabama's out. And the way they've got it right now, if Oklahoma State wins, they're going to be in. Okay? Now, if Oklahoma State loses and Alabama loses, then you have a situation where you'll have Georgia, Michigan, Cincinnati, and Notre Dame will be in there. Now, if the unthinkable happens, if Michigan, Alabama, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma State lose, now you really get, you really get the chaos, because I doubt this is going to happen. But if it does, okay, if all 4 of those teams lose, I think you're going to see Notre Dame at number 2. I think you're going to see Ohio State become the first team with 2 losses to make it at number 3. And then the question is, who do they put at number 4? And I don't know who they'll put it number 4.
All these teams we're talking about now have 2 losses. Ohio State,
That's
Ole
correct.
Miss, Baylor. So I think if what you just said happens, I think they put Alabama in still with 2 losses.
Well, I'll tell you what I think is going to happen. Here's what I think is going to
They
happen.
put them number 4, I bet.
If Michigan, Alabama, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma State all lose, okay,
Yeah.
I think Notre Dame's in, no question.
They'll be number 2.
They'll be number 2. Now, here's the thing, though. Ohio State's not playing in a conference championship game. Ole Miss is not playing in a conference championship game. Oregon, sitting at number 2. Playing in a conference championship game. Number 10, excuse me. If they beat Utah, a team that beat them a few weeks ago, I think Oregon gets in, okay? Because they will have won a conference, okay? Now you start getting into some really difficult areas, because look at Iowa at number 13. Is it conceivable that they could jump all the way to number 4 if they beat Michigan?
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible, right?
Yeah, I agree. They'll probably put a team that just won. If these teams have 2 losses, they'll put one in that just won a championship game over like Ohio State.
I would think so.
Or Ole Miss.
But remember, they love Ohio State. Okay, so
yeah, that's true.
And remember too, Nathan. If Michigan, Alabama, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma State all lose, you got to fill 3 playoff spots. So if Notre Dame gets one, who do the other 2 go to? I think Ohio State might get one of those.
Baylor would have beaten Oklahoma State.
That's right. Baylor would probably get it. You're right.
So I feel like there's too many teams with 2 losses who would have upset highly ranked teams in the championship game, like Iowa and Baylor, to have Ohio State be in.
That's a good point.
And Alabama, they love Alabama like they love Ohio State, but they would have lost the number 1 undefeated team in an SEC championship. They may get it.
Yeah, but I find it hard to believe that Alabama's sitting at number 3. If they lose their second game of the year, will drop just 1 spot. Yeah. I just don't see that happening. But let's be more realistic. Let's really look at what we think really could happen, okay? And actually, the thing we just said really could. But I think probably...
Who do you think has the best chance to lose?
That's a really good question, Nathan.
I think Alabama has the best chance because they're playing Georgia.
I think Alabama has the best chance. I think Oklahoma State has a decent chance. Baylor's not a bad football team.
I think all these teams have a decent chance to lose.
I agree with that. I mean, Iowa.
It's just unlikely that I think it's just playing the odds that all three.
It's unlikely, right? But I don't see a game there that tells me that I would say that they're going to win. No questions asked. Okay.
Well, on Georgia's side, yeah, they would win.
Possibly, yeah. That would be the closest one that I would say they're probably definitely going to win. But you look at the other ones. I mean, Iowa's no slouch. Iowa's a 10-2. I mean, they were ranked number 2 early in the season. They're not a bad football team, Iowa, and they can beat Michigan. And especially when Michigan's coming off such an emotional win, you never know what could happen.
And all these teams that we're talking about, that are, except for Houston, that are playing these playoff teams. They have all these other teams have something more to play for than just ruining their season.
That's right.
Iowa, Baylor, they could get into it if they beat their team.
That's right.
So they have a lot more to play for than just like, I hope we can upset their season.
Well, I think too. Let's say this. We know this for sure. Oklahoma State with a win only needs one upset. They only need one of the 3 at Michigan, Alabama, or Cincinnati to lose to get in. Notre Dame needs 2 to happen. They have to have 2 of the 4. Michigan, Alabama, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State. 2 of those have to lose for Notre Dame to get in. And then for these other teams we've talked about, Baylor, Oregon, Iowa, they have to have pretty much all 4 of those teams lose to have a chance to get in.
And they're not going to do this, but Houston right now is 21, ranked 21st. They're 11-1.
Yeah, they're not going to. No.
They've played the same schedule as Cincinnati, though, basically, right? Because they're in the same conference. They haven't played, I guess, a team like Notre Dame.
No.
But they're basically playing the same schedule.
Right.
And I know they're not going to move them up, but they lost their opening game to Texas Tech, Houston. After that, they've won out. But, again, I'm just wondering, like, they're 21 right now with 1 loss. Cincinnati's number 4 undefeated.
Right.
If Cincinnati would have lost to Notre Dame, I feel like they would be a lot higher than 21 right now. And my point is just like I feel like they're giving Cincinnati way too much credit based on like the past seasons. Is what I'm trying to say. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, I think Cincinnati when they beat Notre Dame, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say they were maybe 7 or 8, and Notre Dame was like maybe 8 or 9, if I remember correctly. So if they would have lost to Notre Dame, I think they would have dropped them probably 14th or 15th.
Right,
but then they would have crept back up.
Yeah, I'm saying.
Right.
But my point is they would be a lot higher right now than a 1-loss Houston.
Sure they would be, yeah.
But Notre Dame, I mean, I don't know. Notre Dame's a higher ranked team than Texas Tech, but Texas Tech's not ranked. But I'm just saying, like, I feel like even within their own conference, they value Cincinnati a lot higher than
they do
because of past seasons.
They do. You're right, and I think.
I guess my point is, if Houston beats Cincinnati, they're both going to have 1 loss, and Houston just would have beaten the number 4 team in the country.
Correct.
They should theoretically Houston should jump up quite a bit, right?
They should, but they're not going to do it. Right. I mean, but you're right.
But theoretically, they should jump up ahead of all these 10-2 teams, right?
They should. Yeah, they should. I agree.
I don't know. They're not going to, but
well, I think what you're going to see happen is if Houston beats Cincinnati and then wins their bowl game, when the final polls come out, Houston will be right up there with 1 loss. But that's not going to help them any because it really doesn't matter. So I think we're starting to see some clarity. We know now pretty much who's going to be in given certain scenarios, and see the thing is the reason they didn't put Alabama. Well, it really doesn't matter, but Alabama is not going to finish number 4 either way because they don't want a rematch with Georgia.
Well, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. There'd be a rematch with Georgia. Plus, I think, like you said, dropping them to 3. Having beat Auburn, I think shows you that if they have 2 losses, they're not going to put them in.
And that's why if they happen to beat Georgia by some strange fluke, and Michigan wins, I think you'll see Michigan 1. I think you'll see Alabama 2. I think you'll see Cincinnati 3, and Georgia will be 4 because they don't want Georgia to play Alabama right away. They'll have to play in the final if they win, but. Yes. Do
you think they do that type of thing? They rank them based on stuff like that. They won't put. In other words, if they were just looking at purely of how they want to rank them, you think they would actually want to put Alabama 1 if they beat Georgia, but they're not going to just because they don't want them to play Georgia.
If they put Alabama 1, they'll put Georgia 3 because they don't want to match them.
I guess my point is, don't you think they should be ranking teams though not based on future matchups?
They should
be ranking them based on what has just occurred.
They should, but again, you got to remember the thinking there then is, hey, you're in, okay. And from a TV standpoint, do you really want to put a game on TV the next week of 2 teams that just played? Or not the next week, but in the next matchup where these 2 teams just played.
When's the first playoff
think it's like right around the New Year.
Year's, okay.
Yeah, so it's
I think
what
it's too long. It's way
it
too
is.
long.
It is. I agree with that.